Good afternoon and welcome to the David Muir Lecture Series. My name's Kes Dugdale and I'm the Director of the John Smith Centre. As your MC today, it's my job to introduce the Centre and our guests, David Muir and Joel Benenson, both joining us from the States, so we should really say good morning to you both. The John Smith Centre exists to make the positive case for politics and public service. And we do that in three key ways: by running internships and development programmes for young people, helping pull down the barriers they face accessing public life; through the research we do, looking at the degree to which the public trust their politicians and their public servants; and through advocacy and events, showcasing the very best of politics and public service. And today's guests are no exception to that rule. David Muir is the former Director of Strategy to Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He's a best-selling author and also has the best part of 2 decades worth of business experience in the field of global marketing. He served as a visiting fellow at Harvard, currently serves on the advisory board of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, and crucially, and above all else, he's also on the board of the John Smith Centre here at the University of Glasgow. Joel Benenson is the only pollster ever in democratic history to have achieved success in 3 presidential election campaigns. That's 2 Barack Obama campaigns and Bill Clinton's back in 1996. Joel founded his own firm, Benenson Strategy Group, in 2000, a highly acclaimed global strategic research and consultancy firm. And we're delighted to have you both with us today. David, it's over to you.
Yes, thank you for that lovely introduction, and it's a pleasure to speak to you and all the students and alumni of the university, and I'm delighted to introduce my friend Joel Benenson, who speaks to us from the great state of Montana. So Joel, I'm going to dive right into it, and so I've got some questions to start us off. But it would be great if participants on the call would just kind of, write down any questions that you would like to ask of Joel in the 90 minutes that we've got together. So Joel, first question, how did Biden do it?
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me, those of you at the university and all the students who are joining us today. I love having conversations like this. And I do look forward to your questions. I'm a New Yorker where a day without an argument is considered a lost opportunity. So feel free to challenge me on anything after we're done with our chat a bit. Look, I've over my years of doing this, I've developed a certain mantra about presidential campaigns. I think they're about big things, not small things. I think they're about the future, not the past. And they're about their lives, not your life. And that doesn't mean your candidate's bio and story doesn't matter, but it means ultimately, if you can't make that story connect with the voters that you need to persuade, then you're not going to win. I also think that when I talk about big things, not small things, I am talking about the things that are going on in their lives, but I'm also talking about the attitudes and values that they bring to the table. Because it's very hard to pry people away from strongly held attitudes and values that they have about the issues of the day, about their life in general. And the second thing here, and I would say that on all 3 of those fronts, and I'll talk about that specifically in a minute, I think Joe Biden outperformed Donald Trump, and that's the key to winning. And, I say that because when you're an incumbent running for re-election, you have enormous advantages. To give everybody in the audience some sense of what I'm talking about is since 1900, Donald Trump will be only the 7th president to seek re-election and lose. We see the presidency as a very big office. It's been the most powerful job in the world for more than a half a century at least. And the voters see it that way. And they often say, we learned this with President Obama and his reelect. Voters would say to us, when Mitt Romney said he could have done a better job than Obama in the first 4 years, they said, oh, that's nonsense. It's going to take him a year just to find his way around the White House, which of course isn't true because the White House is very small. But they're talking about the scope of the job. So when you're the incumbent, it's a referendum on you. And what you have to do running as an incumbent is a very simple formula. You have to leverage your strengths as candidate or president, and in this case, you're both, or inoculate against your weaknesses. And Donald Trump's biggest flaw as a human being and as a president is he's lacking in reparative skills. His narcissism gets in the way of being able to admit he ever made a mistake. It's a lesson he learned from a lawyer he had at some point, a kind of despicable human being named Roy Cohn, who told him, never say you're sorry, never admit you made a mistake. And so when you think about the big things that were going on in the environment in the US, it was around the economy, it was around COVID, and post George Floyd and the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police in the late spring was about restoring decency and respect. And if you look at the exit polls, in fact, the three big issues that people cited, the top three issues were the economy, it was racial equality, and it was COVID. I've been polling for a long time. This is the first time racial equality has been the most important issue in a presidential campaign. And if you think about how Donald Trump reacted to all of those developments, he was out of touch with where voters' lives were. He kept saying, we took care of the China virus. We did a great job. I mean, we've got 10 million households in America who have someone out of work because of COVID. We have almost 250,000 people dead because of COVID. So in terms of inoculating against your weaknesses, he was just doubling down on his weaknesses every time he opened his mouth. So to a great extent, he did almost everything wrong in the campaign. Notwithstanding that, this ended up being a fairly close election. And I think Joe Biden, by really repeatedly talking about restoring decency and respect between each other and among each other, was really striking a chord with voters about something that was really important in their lives, about their value. They were seeing behavior in a president that they had never quite seen before, and Biden was very much the antidote for that. Now, the other thing I'll say, and we can go into this in more depth, because I do want to get to plenty of time for questions, but I often say that America is really a 50-50 country. We don't have many landslide elections. Barack Obama was only the 7th president in the history of the United States to be both elected to his first term and reelected to his second term with more than 50% of the vote both times. Think about that. Only 7 people. That's how closely divided we are. So I say 50-50 kind of figuratively. What I really mean is we're probably 40-40 with people on the left, people on the right, and about 20% who are in the middle and who call themselves moderates and independents. And when you're running a presidential campaign, for those of you who follow it, you hear a lot about the battleground states. And one of the reasons they're the battleground states is because they really do have a hardcore middle of the road people. And it doesn't mean they don't have views that lean one way or the other at all, but they largely will vote across party lines more than others. They think of themselves as independents. And if you look at what Biden did in really concentrating his campaign in states that were part of the blue wall, what we call, because we have to get to this Electoral College win. I'm sure you all know what that is. But Hillary Clinton lost Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. It was the first time a Democrat had lost those 3 states in 5 or 6 presidential elections, and she lost them all. Now we can talk about, we don't have to go back in time about what the campaign did wrong in 2016, but that was on the campaign. And they made a really bad decision about those 3 states that they thought they had locked up. Biden did the opposite. And what he did is he not only won those 3 states, but he won them by winning the middle. And what I mean by that is that if you compare his performance among moderate voters, people who qualify themselves as neither liberal or conservative, Biden won 64% of the moderate voters in this election. Hillary won only 52% of those voters. That's a 12% difference among a group that constitutes 20% of the electorate. That's pretty much the difference between her deficit, a good significant chunk of her deficit, and Biden's success. The same pattern holds true if I talk about people who describe themselves as independent voters. And I think that group was also critically important. And the same pattern held true there with independent voters. Biden outperformed Hillary by a 12-point margin. But the other group that I would say would be really important, and this goes to the point I made about Trump being tone deaf, is that the number one issue on people's minds still was the economy. But Biden won the economy over voters who said that their own economic condition was the same or worse than it was 4 years ago. Now, that group was made up of about 60% of the voters. So you've got a president who's out there saying, I built the greatest economy in the history of the country. And you've got 6 in 10 people who are saying their lives are the same or worse than they were 4 years ago. So when I talk about it being about their lives, not yours, this is what I mean about Trump being out of touch. And if you look at those voters who said their lives were only the same or worse than they were 4 years ago, Biden won those voters by about 30 points. Among those who said it was the same as it was 4 years ago, among those who said it was worse than 4 years ago, he won them by 51 points. So Trump continually was just demonstrating that he was out of touch with their lives. And he reinforced it on what was really something hanging over the country and the world still. If you look at the coronavirus, he kept talking about we have to rebuild our economy. Meanwhile, if you ask voters what was more important, containing the coronavirus, what's a more urgent need now to contain the coronavirus, even if it means not dealing with the economic needs or rebuilding the economy. And by 51 to 42, people said deal with coronavirus, even if it slows down our economic return. So you just can't be that out of touch with the voters. And the last thing I'd say, because it does go to the character of these candidates, a plurality of voters made up their minds in the month of September. Now, according to the exit polls. Now, I don't have a second piece of data to document this, but the major event that happened in the month of September, we were past the conventions. It was the first debate. I don't know how closely you all followed the first debate, but Donald Trump crashed in that debate. He came across as a bully. He came across as unbelievably rude. He was dismissive of everybody. Joe Biden, his opponent, the moderator, he was nasty, he was mean. And this is at a time, as I say, that people are hungry, and particularly after the killing of George Floyd. People went through the protests and everything. They really wanted us to restore a sense of decency and respect and be able to have the kind of common conversation that we need in this country. And so on every front, what basically happened here, I don't want to say that Donald Trump lost the election. I think Joe Biden ran the right campaign to beat Donald Trump. But certainly Donald Trump was making unforced errors every day. But at the end of the day, Joe Biden was the one who over and over again talked about restoring respect and decency among each other, talked about that we're all Americans. He was giving a more uplifting vision of the future. And one that connected more with the values of where people were. So at the end of the day, I think he was connecting with them quite a bit. The last thing, and I'll stop here, but I think it's important because it hasn't been this way in previous presidential elections. And I've polled and been attentive to them all very much as a professional since 1996 in Bill Clinton's re-election. But I said there were 3 top issues for voters in this campaign. COVID virus was one, the economy was the second, and racial inequality was the third. And Donald Trump continued to stoke the subtle and some more overt racism in this country. And, when you have 20% of people saying it's one of the most important issues, and 70% of people in the country who say racism is a problem in the United States today, 70%. Yeah. That's a lot of white voters, not just people of color. And those people who said racism is a problem voted about 3-1 for Joe Biden. He piled up a pretty significant win there. So I think that's the ecosystem we were operating in. I think what I said at the outset of this about the power of incumbency, this is one where the incumbent fundamentally didn't understand what he needed to do, or didn't have the skills or the personality or the DNA to deal with it. And Joe Biden did. Turns out he was the right person at the right time for this election. And he leveraged all those strengths in the way, as I said, making this election about the future, not the past, connecting with people's lives, their lives, and making it about big things, not small things.
Well, Joel, that's a kind of excellent starter into our discussion today, and there's some great questions coming in, and I will get to them shortly. But going back to the point, so very kind of eloquent description of how Biden won. But one could make the argument, Joel, how come the Democrats then did so badly down ballot? I remember the night before the election, I was actually speaking to a Republican strategist who'd been working for Susan Collins and was saying she's done, like she's not going to win. So this is the senator in Maine. She's imposed, many of these senators who look very, very vulnerable, with the exception of Colorado and Arizona. They stayed in post. So what was wrong with, so Biden's message seemed to have traction. What was wrong with the messaging kind of down ballot?
I'm not sure that there was anything wrong with the messaging down ballot, David. I think there's something about the character of the American people. You've got to remember that culturally, we are an upstart country. We're only we're barely 250 years old. That's nothing compared to the UK, right? And the countries over there. And in fact, I always talk about the fact that we are an upstart country. We took on the most powerful power on earth in our revolution and won. And so I think there is, and if you look at our founders, and we give our founders a lot of credit, but they were so weary of power and concentrated power. They created checks and balances. They were readers of the Greek philosophers. They believed in theories of disinterestedness. They didn't want people who had land and money in office because they believed the aristocracy would be the right, better, more elevated people. They believed in a theory of disinterestedness. They believed those people wouldn't be interested in amassing power. And what's happened today is we obviously have a political class that I think voters in America believe is interested in nothing more than retaining and holding on to power. And what they don't want is concentrated power. And so all this talk about Democrats having their hands and control of all three levers of government here, the presidency, the Senate, and the House, I think there was a little bit of a reaction to that and said, well, yeah, Biden's going to be president. I'm going to make sure there's just a bit of a check on this guy. Yeah. And in some of those states where Democrats thought we really had a path to taking the Senate, yes, we lost seats in both the House and the Senate. We still have a majority in the House, but I think voters at the Senate in particular said, no, I'm going to keep a check on this guy. I want to get rid of Trump, and I want Biden in there. He's the right guy, but I want a little bit of a check on him.
Thanks, Joel. One of the things that you've kind of talked about is the kind of the division in American politics, the idea that it's 40-40. And one of the things that I find endlessly fascinating, because there's a very clear read across to the UK, is two of the great divides appear to be geography. And so small town rural versus growing urban metropolis. And the other kind of key divide in American politics seems to focus around non-college educated versus college educated. And that again was a major, if you try and understand Brexit, it's the non-college educated, voter who was, a big driver of that. And it was the small towns that were the driver of Brexit. And they seem to kind of put fuel in Trump's tank. So what do you think, if anything, can be done to address those divisions? Because it really does seem to be driving increased polarization to a certain extent.
Yeah, although look, the Democrats, there was some gains that Biden made with white non-college voters generally. Not enough, obviously, and we saw even some gains with rural voters a bit, and a bigger shift with suburban voters. Hillary Clinton lost suburban voters by 4 points, and suburban voters are becoming more diverse, but they're still more white than mixed race. Biden won suburban voters by 3 points. Now that sounds small, like, oh, well, that's only a 7-point shift. but suburban voters in America make up 50% of the electorate. So if you look at somebody who just won the popular vote by a significant margin, I mean, a 3-point margin, but, you know, several million votes, that shift in the suburbs accounted for half of it. I think Democrats need to do a better job talking to rural voters. I think, you know, I can't remember who it was who said showing up is 50% of the game. In politics, and you do have to show up, and you got to show people you care about their lives. Now, you know, with our elections in a country the size of ours, you know, it's a little bit harder sometimes to say, oh, I'm going to go campaign in rural areas. You know, I've got a busy schedule. Let's say you're not campaigning in all 50 states, but you're probably campaigning in somewhere around 20, you know, to 25. You're not just campaigning in battleground states because you have to make sure you win your base too. But I think there are a lot of things we have to do. I think we have to talk to rural voters more about their economic lives. I think we have to, they're very much, you know, cultural voters. You do have to realize that the base of the Republican Party right now are white evangelicals, and they have been since Ronald Reagan, and they comprise almost 30% of the vote. And they do tend to be a little more not concentrated in the rural area, but they do represent a large group of voters in rural areas. And those are voters who are voting largely on religious or cultural values more than other values. And I think what we have to do is respect those values and the differences we have with them, and then try to speak more about the things that we have in common and that we are better on in terms of the issues, which are things around economic fairness, things about their kids' future, a better education system for rural America, make sure that those communities aren't left behind in a changing, more technological and digital economy. Make sure we get internet to those communities, right? We've got places in America, which I could argue is still the greatest country on earth, certainly one of the strongest economies on earth. We've got kids who is doing homework on school buses before they get off those buses to go home because they don't have internet in their homes. You know, shame on us for not addressing that when we had the White House for 8 years. You know, if we can do things like that and get clean water into communities like that, which is really that's their number one concern when it comes to environmental issues. Do I have clean water coming out of my tap? I think we got to talk about the things in their lives. And it's basically going to be jobs. It's going to be clean water. It's going to be my kids have a better future than I have.
And is that why, I mean, I was looking when I was like trying to understand this rural urban divide. I mean, when you look back, if you look at everybody now in the UK, by the way, Joel is now an expert on counties across the US, thanks to John King and his man. So
everybody in the US was even before John King. That's been the story of my life for the last 15 years. I've got to deal with all the experts.
That's right. So if we take one of the
innocent experts.
So if you look at one of the counties that King would go on about, which is Erie County in Pennsylvania, so right in the north of the state. So when you were running the Obama campaign in 08 and 12, Obama took that by 59% of the vote. And then in 12, he took it 57.8, so we'll call it 58%. But then Trump just narrowly squeaked Clinton 48.8 to 46.8%. And then Biden took it, but again, by a very, very narrow margin, 49.8%, 48.8%. Why do you think Obama was able to rack up such big leads, you know, in this kind of what was predominantly kind of rural small town area, and you know that weren't able to happen kind of last time around? And what lessons should Biden take for a kind of future campaign?
Well, look, first of all, I think Joe Biden ran a great campaign, and I think he was a great candidate. I think he was a better candidate for president this time than he ever was before. This isn't the first time he came to the rodeo, as we say in the United States. But, you know, I think Barack Obama was an extraordinary talent. He was the right person at the right time. I think his youthfulness was very appealing to people. You know, we have not elected a whole lot of presidents who were over the age of 60 at the time of their first election. You know, now we've had two over the age of 70 back to back. as I said earlier, we're actually a pretty young country compared to some places in the rest of the world, certainly across the pond there, right?
Yeah.
But so you think about that, and Barack Obama was able to bring together a very unique coalition. He was the face of a changing America in a way that Joe Biden was able to make this race about the future and important issues, which is why he won. But Barack Obama himself was the personification of so many things at the right moment in time that Americans were responding to about him. His youth, his race, his eloquence, his dynamism. He is, like I say, he brought a set of skills that at that moment were absolutely what the country was hungry for. And I think I believe, transformed the political map in 2008. That map has not reverted despite Donald Trump winning. The other thing, we have this anomaly called the Electoral College. It's a relic of our founders. It's probably the least democratic thing they created, along with the Senate, for a variety of reasons they couldn't envision at the time. But, if you go back, I think, to the last 32 years, only one president has managed, one Republican in one of his elections has managed to win the popular vote in the country.
Yeah.
And that was George Bush in his reelect. Clinton won it twice. Obama won it twice. Bush won it only once out of his two elections. Clinton won it last time and lost, and Biden won it. And, we could talk about this in the Q&A, but I'll just make my pitch for this now. We should get rid of the Electoral College. In America, we have only one national election every 4 years, and it's for President of the United States. And the notion that the only office we have that everyone is voting for at the same time and for the same office and the same two people, that we're not making the winner of that vote the president, it's an anomaly and a relic from 300 years ago that we ought to get rid of.
Okay, well, I think we're definitely going to come back to that. Joel, you've been a frequent visitor to the Oval Office, starting with Bill Clinton. If you as no doubt you will do, at some stage or another, get a call to kind of go back in there and to advise our President Biden, what would your guidance be about how he governs between now and the next big electoral test, which will be the midterms in 2022, and how he can position the party for what could be a difficult midterm election?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with your premise that I will get a call and be asked for advice. I think he's got a great team of people around him. I know all of them. They have done an amazing job. But nonetheless, I think that, I think Joe Biden brings something that is a quality that is necessary to the office, and it's who he is as a person. He will bring humility to the office. He will know that he doesn't have all the answers. And I think that was a strength for Barack Obama too. You have to believe in your power and your ability to make the decisions. But like President Obama, Joe Biden knows that he will need to rely on the help of others. He will know that he'll have to work through decisions, that you don't govern by fiat. He will especially know that you have to build coalitions for your argument. So I could say those would be the pieces of advice I would give him. I think the other thing is he's got to be visible in reaching out to the other side. I think you can't just pay lip service to working with the other side. He knows the players in the Senate, even the difficult ones like Mitch MCConnell, who is continuing to be difficult and, in my mind, I could characterize it with any number of pejoratives. His inability to actually acknowledge President-elect Biden's win. But I think that will be Joe Biden's instinct. He will look to build those coalitions. He will look to bring people in. You know, we have to stop thinking that compromise is a dirty word. Politics is a messy sport, if you will, right? Yeah. There are few issues where the winner takes all. There are a few elections where the winner takes all, and this past election just proved it. So you cannot make every legislative fight you have a winner-take-all position. That doesn't mean there aren't principles and values that you can never compromise on, but you know, there's got to be more than one way to get to what you want. And I would also say, you know, this is the nature of our country, and people don't fully appreciate this. You know, we are a very incremental country, whether it goes back to the Puritan roots that are fairly conservative. I don't know, but you know, that those were the folks who were here first, right? But we are conservative, not in the political sense, but you know, we work up to doing big things. It is a challenge when you're the leader of the free world to sometimes hammer these things out and fight over them and bicker over them. You know, look what we have in this country. The argument over healthcare, for heaven's sakes, has been raging now for 25 or 30 years, and we're still fighting over it. And people want it. You know, the Republicans, unfortunately, I don't know what polls they're looking at, but a majority of Americans do not want to repeal Obamacare. And they keep talking about it. I mean, so we're going to keep fighting over one of the most basic, you know, Americans now regard healthcare as a right. It's not technically a right. It's a full benefit. Should be, but, you know, so we have to, and I think Biden will know this. I think Biden will not be an absolutist. I think there are certain principles he will never relax or relent on, and that's the right thing. But it also, I think he also understands that sometimes you've got to work through what is a very messy system, which is called democracy. And it really is a messy system. You have a much easier system there. Parliamentary rule, the majority is always in control. And you will get tested when there's a call for a new election or at the time for a new election. But, you know, you control Parliament all the time. That's not the way it works in America. Did we lose David?
I might have lost David's connection there. So that gives me a great opportunity to ask a question of my own. Some of the words we've not really heard yet much about are Kamala Harris and the black vote, or indeed the women's vote, and the degree to which that influenced the campaign. I mean, it's clear she had a strength of support in California, but just how far across the US did that travel?
Well, yeah, but I mean, Joe Biden did very well with women voters. Obviously, they're part of the Democratic base. I think Kamala Harris also really helped galvanize and motivate the African-American vote and votes with people of color. Republicans were claiming they were going to make some inroads with both groups, Latinos and African-Americans. I think that was probably one of their biggest disappointments, is that they really failed to do that, largely because you have a president of the United States who is seen as not respecting racial minorities. You know, he showed that throughout the campaign. He never relented on it. You know, he tries to exploit those kinds of divisions in a way that no other president of the United States in modern times has done. So I think she was a really valuable player for Biden. She showed youth, you know, to counterbalance the two septuagenarians running for president. She proved herself to be a really steady campaigner. And what I liked the best about watching Vice President-elect Harris on the stump was, I thought she, you know, often as a senator showed her prosecutorial chops. And I think as a campaigner for vice president, she kind of showed her presidential chops. She really showed a side of her that was really valued, I think, by the voters in terms of empathy, in terms of talking about their lives, the changes that they needed in their lives. And she really, I thought, slipped into that role seamlessly and did a great job as a running mate for Biden. And I think, you know, her family is multicultural. It looks like America. You know, same is true for, you know, Barack Obama. There were things about his life story that resonated with people, you know, and, you know, the number of Americans today who have a family member who is of another race is growing constantly. We are not anywhere near have we corrected the original sin that goes back to our founding and slavery and the fight for freedom for all people and living up to that principle. But this was a big step forward, and I think she was a great pick for vice president. I think she's going to be a great vice president.
Joel, thanks for that. And sorry, I kind of disappeared there. I don't know what happened. We've got a ton of questions about President Trump, who still seems to gain a lot of attention, especially from this audience. I mean, one question is, look, at the end of the day, he got 70 million votes, which is, so he upped his absolute number of votes. I mean, what can you take away from that? And secondly, I mean, you have experience of going up against him in 2016. I mean, what do you think it is that he's got that can make him so effective with certain groups in America?
Fox News. I talked to some Republicans. There's a great book called How Democracies Die. And it's a study by two political scientists of authoritarians. And when I started reading the book, I thought, oh, they're just describing all these things that create a taxonomy that applies to Trump. Attacks the media, criminalizes their opponent. They call on their supporters to engage in violence. Donald Trump had done all of those things. Lock her up, lock him up, beat the crap out of him, right? All of those things. And I thought they were creating this, and they looked back at Hitler, at Mussolini, but they also brought it up to modern day, Orban, Chavez, Fujimori, et cetera, others. And what they ultimately said is, and finally, because I'm thinking, oh, they're just making this fit Trump in a way. But then ultimately what they said is, but the real ingredient that is the ultimate factor in allowing authoritarians to seize all the power they want is that the gatekeepers in the political society and culture break down and fail. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned this in a conversation among some of the panels we're doing with some Republicans. And I said, where are the gatekeepers in the Republican Party? And they said, there are none. It's Fox News. And so, when you ask about Donald Trump, if you have a network, I'd really like to thank the UK for sending us Rupert Murdoch and that network.
Blame Australia.
Yeah, but when you have a megaphone of one of the leading cable networks, which interestingly enough is the only one that doesn't fact check Donald Trump, who has said more than 20,000 false or misleading statements during his presidency. Who knows what he'll do now? That's an incredible megaphone to have. And when, I get Republican consultants telling me, well, they are the gatekeepers, you basically have a wholly owned, it really isn't, but figuratively speaking, a wholly owned cable network with enormous reach, couple that with talk radio, that is, it's not even a subsidiary, it's probably the mother company of the Republican Party right now. And that is where his power derives from. And so when you say he got 70 million votes, yeah, he did. He's got their base and he gets some votes in the middle. But as I said, significant difference. And if the party doesn't recognize, holy smokes, we just got our butts kicked with voters in the middle, right? Joe Biden did 12 points better with moderates and with independent voters than Hillary Clinton did. We got to fix that problem. If they don't take that on, well, but they may be content to win. Look, they won at the state legislative level. We didn't win a single state legislative house this time, where we won several back in 2018. We didn't win a governor's race, both of which were very important this year because of reapportionment. We now draw district lines for Congress in every state. And you need to have at least one lever of government at the state level, because that's where those lines are drawn. And we didn't win any more. We did pick up about 7 state houses and about the same number of governorships back in 2018. We got none this time. So, no Democrat should be licking their chops and thinking this was a slam dunk for us. It wasn't.
On the point on Fox News, Linda Atkinson, who's been asking some great questions, she makes the point that though the Fox coverage, like they cut away from him recently because they said, what he was saying, was inaccurate. But do you get the sense it will be Fox that will call time on his, his presidency and get him to kind of turn over the keys? Do you get the sense that they're starting to pivot away from him now?
Well, look, I mean, I think, at this point, it's probably, the 2 sons who will have more say in that than Rupert Murdoch, right? So that's hard to say. I mean, I think they're younger. They may see the world differently than Rupert did, but, on the other hand, that is a cash cow for them. I don't know. I mean, it would be wonderful if they did. It would be wonderful if they said, we want to bring a different set of values to our coverage. Think about the fact they are the only major cable or news network that doesn't fact check Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Why?
Okay. Thanks for that, Joel. Eva Murray's asked a very interesting question. I mean, one state that Trump did well in was Florida, and the Biden campaign actually kind of underperformed in Miami-Dade versus Hillary Clinton. And Eva asked the question, which is, what was wrong with the Democrats' communication to Cuban Americans? Also, it's not just Cuban Americans, it's a big Venezuelan community. But she asked the question, which is, do you think the kind of socialism attack actually, hurt Biden in Miami-Dade and in some of the other counties where there's a large communities from Latin America, from people who have escaped from regimes that call themselves socialist?
Yeah, and we've seen that definitely in the past. And you cannot, when you poll in the United States, their Latinos are not all the same. You have to poll and ask questions about country of origin. You have to ask about what language is spoken most in the household. Are they English dominant? Are they Spanish dominant? Yeah. And country of origin, because we've seen for a long time that depending on those factors, those voters can be much more conservative in their ideological leanings now in the United States. And certainly when it comes to socialism, Florida in particular, Cuban Americans, which make up a big portion of the population of Latino voters in Florida, have long leaned towards the Republican Party. You've had Republican governors elected in that state. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And you have to work hard for those votes. There's no question about it. Florida is a much more important state in presidential elections in the Electoral College game we have to play for Republicans than it is for Democrats. If you flip Florida as a Democrat, the Republican's pretty much done. Winning Florida for a Republican doesn't guarantee their win. The states that guaranteed Trump's win, or that made Trump's win possible against Hillary Clinton in 2016, were Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And getting those states back, and then winning some other states. Look, we're looking at Georgia, we're looking at Arizona. I can't remember the last time those 2 states voted for a Democrat in a presidential election. I mean, Georgia, I can. I think it was 1992 and Bill Clinton. Yeah. Arizona, I don't remember what year it was. I don't think Obama won Arizona in either of his, but I could be wrong
he didn't.
about that.
He didn't.
Yeah.
And actually, while we're on the subject of Georgia, we've got a question from Linda, who said, can you discuss the impact of Stacey Abrams in Georgia, and how important was she to the success in that state?
Hugely important.
Yeah.
It's a great example of somebody who narrowly missed winning and didn't stop campaigning and building. What Stacey Abrams did was just lead an effort. She knows the state well. She is a dynamic speaker, a tremendous political talent. And what she made sure was, after her near miss in her race, that they were going to keep mobilizing in Georgia. And hats off to her, because I think that is not a one-time effort, I should say. What she is building there is an electorate that reflects population changes. You know, some interesting fact here, and we've looked at the population changes in the United States at my firm. We did this about a year and a half ago, of the population shifts in the country. And what we've seen, and historically, just so you know, in the wake of the financial crisis in America, for the first time since Reconstruction, the migration of African Americans from north to south was greater than the migration from south to north. First time since Reconstruction, right? I mean, that is, 170 years ago. And the reason for that, people say, is during times of economic hardship, which was the Great Recession that occurred under, George Bush's second term and that Obama inherited, is that people tend to move to places where they have family and friends during times of economic hardship, because that is what is most likely to give them a connection to a job. And so I think we've seen growth in some of those states that going forward will make them probably a little more competitive. North Carolina, President Obama won that once. I think that's another state that we can build on. And it's a little different than Florida, which is more of a retirement state, older population, and definitely a diverse population. But we can win Florida, and we should compete there more, because we have to keep Republicans on defense there to the extent we can.
Okay, that's great. I've got lots of questions around.
Let's take them. Throw them at me.
Lots of questions around the kind of contestation of the results. The thing, what was said by Pompeo in jest yesterday about the transition towards the next Trump administration. I mean, how much do you think, is this going to hurt the Republican Party, or does it, just keep this kind of cavalcade going? I mean, what do you think of the implications of the reluctance to admit defeat, not just by Trump, but, let's be clear, Mitch Mcconnell, along with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, has not called to congratulate Joe Biden, unlike President Macron, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Chancellor Merkel. I mean, does the Republican Party get any cost of that, or does that just kind of keep the base happy?
I don't know how long a leash the Republican Party will have here. You might, I don't particularly understand it, but some might understand them trying to give President Trump a little room to get comfortable with this. I don't think that should be necessary. I don't think they should be doing that. But I think that goes to the comment I made before, that even Republican friends of mine that we've just been doing panels with for 2 days basically say Trump is the Republican Party for now. I think until the establishment Republicans realize that he poses a greater risk than benefit to them, they won't act. They won't take him on. And he is still president of the United States. But, at some point, you would think that smarter heads would prevail. But we haven't seen that yet. And that could hurt them a bit long term. If they hang in there with him too long, they're going to be tagged as Trump apologists, and could face some backlash from voters, particularly those who are in swing states. I mean, you would think right now you've got a lame duck president sitting there. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if you don't have the courage to stand up to this bully now, who will you stand up to?
And then a related question from the audience, which is, how likely do you think it is that Trump will run in 2024?
I don't know. I think that if Donald Trump thinks it is in his financial interest to run again, he will. On the other hand, between now and 2024, he could face criminal prosecution. And if he does, he could be convicted of crimes, which could mean prison time. He's got in the Southern District of New York, they've got his tax returns, they've got his corporate tax returns, his children were officers in the company. If any, I think in that region, I think, and just in general, at this point, if he is found guilty of any kinds of transgressions in that vein, it may be very hard for him to get, a sympathetic judge who will, give him an easy sentence.
And that's an important point for members in the audience in the UK to just to clarify, which is, even if President Trump pardons himself or is pardoned by a very interim president, Pence, that pardon only applies to federal crimes, doesn't apply to crimes that may have been committed in a state. So Joel's point about if the Southern District of New York decides to prosecute him, that would not prevent him from being prosecuted there. Joel, lots of questions about you pollsters kind of got it wrong again, just like in 2016. Do you think that's a valid criticism? And what, if anything, do you think the polling industry can learn from this election and from 2016?
Look, I think it's a mixed bag. I think some pollsters got it wrong and some pollsters got it right. Joe Biden won the popular vote by about 3 points, and I think the Real Clear Politics average, had it within a point or so of that. So it's hard to say that every pollster got it wrong. I think what it shows is that there are too many damn pollsters out there, some of whom just want to promote their names. You've got to be rigorous when you're polling in presidential campaigns. You've got to be rigorous in your methodology. The things we talked about with Latino voters, the things we talked about using not just one method. You can't just do online polling. You can't just do phone polling. You have to use every tool you can to recruit people from panels that actually have identified voters as well. We use text to recruit people to go and do a poll. We give them sometimes a choice. Do you want to do this on the phone or do you want to do it online? Mm-hmm. There are plenty of ways now that you can use the modern technology to give the respondents greater choice so that you can engage a bigger sample and a more diverse sample. And people who are stuck in old methodologies are going to risk leaving a lot of people out who they need to have in their polls. And look, some of the states, if you look at the average polls, and I don't like polling averages generally, by the way. Yeah. So for all you students out there, I've always said the average of good polls and bad polls isn't better polls, right? There's a difference. And there's a qualitative difference there. So, but if you look at them, some of the states, they had Biden ahead by a point in Arizona, by a point in Georgia. I mean, okay, those are the average polls. That means some pollsters did have it right, and I just think the bigger problem is the journalistic obsession with polls. I was a journalist before I was a pollster. And, it's such a great skill set. You think about how that maps to polling. What do journalists do for a living? You find people to talk to in a certain group. You think of interesting and creative questions to ask them to elicit really unique and valuable responses. And you take the array of those responses and you knit it together to write a coherent story that hopefully gets on the front page of your newspaper. Mm-hmm. Well, polling is not very different from that. You think of creative questions to elicit really compelling and interesting information that's relevant to the campaign you're working in. And then you try to stitch all that data together in a coherent story for the campaign and the candidate to execute against. Yeah. So, if we just could get over this horse race obsession and not what most of these polls are universities trying to promote their university name, which I'm not going to fault them for it, but for heaven's sakes, do it right. I call out one poll from one coverage of the New York Times poll in 2016. I think it came out on September 16th, 2016. And instead of touting the horse race in the headline, which is what most journalistic outlets do, oh, Trump's taking a 2-point lead, Hillary's taking a 1-point lead, Hillary's lead shrank, Hillary's lead grows. The headline in that New York Times story, written by a guy named Pat Healy and I think Maggie Haberman, who are both great political reporters at the New York Times, but the headline said, voters see Trump as a risk, but maybe worth it.
Yeah.
Well, that captured the race in a nutshell in 2016.
Yeah.
They thought he was a risk, but he might be worth it. He might shake up the system in a way that Hillary, who was totally seen as an establishment candidate, in a moment, and I will be honest, as Hillary's pollster, 2016, we were living in an anti-establishment moment. If you look at the UK, not just Brexit, but you get Boris Johnson, a bit of an outsider, a bit of a unique figure. If you look at Macron and Le Pen getting into the finals in France, two people who've never held elective office, really. Macron had been in part of the establishment, but as a finance minister, not as an elective politician. But if you think about that moment, and this is what we missed in the Hillary campaign, we were in an anti-establishment moment for good reason. People still felt coming out of the economic crisis, we weren't all out of it yet. They felt the establishment in most democracies, it showed up. Merkel had problems and saw some weakness, right? All of our Democratic partners have seen this. And I think that was Donald Trump's strength. And it's probably the one thing we missed in the Hillary campaign. It may have been very hard to turn her into an anti-establishment candidate. But that Times poll headline has stuck with me forever because it was one of the best ways to report on a poll. Tell me what the poll means. Don't tell me what the horse race is.
Yeah.
As I said, it's often the least important number in a poll.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's a very good answer to the lots of questions that we had about polling. Quite a few people are quite interested in your story, Joel, which is a very interesting story, if you don't mind me saying that. I think quite an inspirational story, because you've done a variety of things in your life, from acting, beer distribution, journalism, and then kind of polling. And it'd be really great. There's a very nice question here from Ellie Ross, who just wanted to kind of understand your career path and how you ended up doing it. And I think, well, being an actor or being in the beer distribution business, how does that make you a better pollster? I think there's lots of reasons why it makes you a better pollster. So I'll hand it over to you just to tell a little bit about, your story and your life.
Yeah, this is going to take a little bit of time, okay? And I just want to write a note to myself here about two things. So yes, I had a very non-traditional path. I didn't become a pollster, as I said, till I was, somewhere in my early 40s. I'd been a theater major in college. Had I been a better actor, I probably wouldn't be here today, but I had my limitations. So yes, I did work, I had an avant-garde theater group I was part of after college. I bounced around a bit. I had an uncle who got me into what's called a beer distributing business in Brooklyn, New York. And I did do different things. Let me tell you an anecdote. Well, first of all, let me say that, polling is all about writing and asking the right questions, as I said. So my experience in theater and my experience as a journalist have really, and a writer, really gave me an understanding of the power of language and how there's often a subtext to what you say in theater. As an actor, it's not just what the words on the page say, it's do you really understand the motivation of that character, and can you express that motivation through those words? My Shakespearean teacher in college said to me, defined theater as the imagining of characters in action. And so there was a lot in that and an appreciation of language that I got. And then certainly as a journalist, I think I mentioned to you, what's the skill set of journalists? You ask a lot of interesting questions, you turn it into a coherent story. So hopefully you can see how those all ladder up. But let me talk about the beer business for a minute. I'll tell you a story. After Obama got reelected in 2016, in my office, I don't let anybody eat lunch at their desk in New York. You have to get up. We have multiple offices, New York, Washington, Los Angeles, and Denver, but you have to eat in a common area. I want people to interact during the day. So, it was after Obama gets reelected and we're all hanging out, having lunch after that. And a young woman at my firm, Shira Angert, who is terrific. She's not there anymore, but we're still good friends. She said to me, "So Joel, of all the things you've done, different things you've done in your life, what has contributed the most to you being the great pollster that you really are?" And without missing a beat, I said, "A beer distributor in Brooklyn." And everybody broke out laughing. And she said, "No, seriously." And I said, "No, seriously, being a beer distributor in Brooklyn." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Look, I got to go to college. My mother was a single mother. My father died when I was very young in the 1950s. And so she was a single mother raising 3 children. I was the youngest of 3, and we were really pretty working class. But I did get to go to college because at the time, the City University of New York was free tuition. You paid a minimal fee, like $60 a semester." I said, "But when I was working as a beer distributor in Brooklyn, everybody I was dealing with every day, from my cashier who was an immigrant from Panama, from one of my managers who was a working class white guy who didn't get out of high school from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, or Danny Smith, who was a guy, a former veteran from Virginia, who headed up to New York to be a little closer to family, but to think his kids would have a better shot there. All my customers, the tavern owners, the grocery stores who could buy beer from me, the bodegas, these were immigrants who were trying to build a better life for their families. And what I got during that every day, my conversations were with the real people of America, people who were struggling, who just wanted the same things. They all wanted to find a way to give a better life to their kids. That cashier, Emelita Jenkins, I still remember her name. I still remember her vividly, from Panama. All she wanted was her little girl to get to be able to go to college. And I have carried those voices with me ever since. And I realized the struggle of people that they pursue not huge dreams, but small dreams too, that can make a meaningful difference in their lives. And I have said always to people at my firm, don't ever look down on the people in your focus groups. Don't ever look down at the answers you get from people in a poll and think, "Oh, these are just whatever people," and dismiss them. Try to think about their lives. By the way, it goes back to my mantra. It's about their lives, not your life. Yeah. And those experiences that I have had, my ability to understand the power of words, the power behind the words, and use polling, not just to ask the same questions over and over again, but to really go deeper. My firm, I will tell you that when I review a survey with a team, particularly with new people and younger people, I often say to them, "Why are you asking the question that way?" And if they say to me, "Well, that's the way we've always asked it," what I answer when they say that is, "That's never a good enough answer. It may be the right answer, but it may be the wrong answer. Saying it's the same way we've always asked it is never the good enough answer. You still have to have a reason to ask it the same way, because the world may have changed. The dynamic may have changed. You may want to learn something better or bigger than that. So you have to tweak the question a little bit." And so I think it's that I brought creativity. I am not, a rigid statistician who, says you have to ask it this way or that way. Yeah. I say the questionnaire is our art form. It's where we get to talk to people and try to get back, even though it's a poll and they may have limited answer choices most of the time, just right questions and answer choices that create the greatest birth for them to really tell us something about their lives. The other thing I'll tell you that matters to me is intensity. I put a lot of value on what we call top box responses. If someone says that a message is very convincing to them, as opposed to somewhat convincing them, that's night and day to me, right? You've got to be very convincing with your message, because if it's only somewhat convincing, it also means it's somewhat unconvincing. You really have to be careful about that. And then you have to go a little deeper and figure out what's working in that message that makes it somewhat convincing, only somewhat convincing. Can you fix it the next time out? So that's a long answer to
That's a great answer.
It is one of my favorite questions, because I think, with all due deference to the academics who are on the call, polling is not about academic rigor. It is not about sticking to a particular methodology. It's not about asking questions only one way. It is the art form of learning information about people. And we use qualitative as well. We build our polls off of focus groups and another technique we use called Ethno-Journaling, which are online journals that people answer. We did them for President Obama, 100 swing voters over 6 nights. They produced 1,400 pages of transcripts for us. We didn't ask them a single political question. It was all about their economic lives. It's why we were able to build the campaign in 2012 in still hard economic times, where we were going to run on the economy and beat Mitt Romney at it, and we did.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic answer, Joel. And for anybody who's interested about Joel's beer distribution days, is he was also distributing beer during the height of the New York riots. And there's a famous picture of him holding a gun outside and protecting his warehouse in the New York Times. So don't mess with Joel. This man knows how to use firearms. On a kind of related point, there lots of people here who are kind of interested in, communications. I mean, what do you look for in kind of, you touched upon it a bit, but what do you look for when you hire kind of new graduates and what have you?
Well, it's really interesting. At Benenson Strategy Group, we give people a writing test.
Yep.
We can teach the polling skills. So we give them a poll, we give them crosstabs, which are the intricate data by subgroup, men, women, white, black, old, young, etc. We teach them how to read the crosstabs. We say, if you haven't, don't worry too much. And if you have questions about this stuff, ask us. We're not giving you a test on your ability to read the crosstabs. And what we want to see is, can they write a coherent story about what the data says?
Yeah.
And so we really look for people. They don't have to be math geniuses. They don't have to be able to do statistical analysis. We have statisticians on staff when we need to use those tools. But I want people who can think creatively about the data that's in front of them. Can they get to a compelling story? And I don't expect them to, pardon me for the American analogy, knock it out of the park, hit a home run in baseball. Yeah. I don't expect them all to hit it out of the park. And I don't think any of us do. We just want to see, are there those glimmers of creative thinking about what the data means, about what the people are really saying? Can they connect the dots? We write these intricate questionnaires and they have different sections, but we know when we create them that we're going to connect the dots when we analyze the data. And can they do that to some extent? Are they seeing a couple of different things there that they can bring together as parts of the story? And we want the writing skills, because again, we're ultimately, I'm a strategist, but my background is all in communications. That's why I've been on the debate prep team in every presidential campaign I've been in, because I have communication skills. I know how to structure the language of an argument. I know how to construct words in a way to make them more impactful in an answer. I know when to lead with your most important message in an answer, if it's in a debate, let's say, or when to close with it.
Yeah.
So those are the things we look for. And you got to be a really nice person.
There's some great advice there, and it's also it's probably why we should all listen to teachers when they talk about writing good essays, because and I kind of think in today's world a really crisply argued memo is a fantastic means of communication to anybody, whether a president or a corporate leader. There are quite a few questions who want to go back to 2016, if that doesn't, cause any PTSD.
No, they just want to keep pouring salt in the wound, huh?
couple of paper cuts. So Jessica has asked a very interesting question, which is, can we rule out foreign intervention in elections like in the 2016 election? And as for the 2016 US elections, do you think it influenced the outcome of that election?
What was it about the foreign?
About foreign intervention. So,
do I think it affected the 2016 election?
Yeah.
Absolutely. No question.
In what ways do you think it affected it?
Well, because there was, being all kinds of misinformation about Hillary Clinton that was being used in the digital sphere, and the timing of WikiLeaks. And I said this on a panel I was on the other day. The Friday about 10 days before Election Day is when the Access Hollywood tape came out.
Yeah.
Donald Trump on tape bragging about basically sexually assaulting women against their will, bragging about it on tape, his voice, no question about it. Came out on a late Friday afternoon, Friday evening. When we go to Harvard, David knows about this. We do a debrief at Harvard Institute of Politics after the election. Historically, every year, both campaigns go there, et cetera. But the Shorenstein Media Center at Harvard keeps track of media coverage throughout the campaign. And their report on the media coverage of the last 10 days, you may recall a guy named James Comey, who decided to bring up Hillary Clinton's emails again, which turned out to not be anything significant, but he decided to inject that. But during those last 10 days of the campaign, there was more coverage of Hillary Clinton's emails in the media than of Donald Trump's Access Hollywood tape. Unbelievable, appalling. And, we know that WikiLeaks has some connections to, certain social, interests in the Soviet Union to destabilize. In addition to that, I am sure that Trump was briefed by the Obama White House and the intelligence officials on what they thought was happening. But like Donald Trump, he won the election. He doesn't care. Yeah. If Russia would have helped him win this election, he wouldn't have cared about that either. He didn't lift a finger to stop it. And there's no doubt that they are meddling and will continue to meddle in the West. If they can destabilize the United States and its leadership role. I think one of the most important things here is that world leaders have called to congratulate President-elect Trump. I think they see it as a big relief to them. And Republican leaders haven't. That's a disgrace for the Republican leaders. I think what Mitch McConnell is doing is a disgrace.
While we're on the subject of Mitch McConnell, somebody has asked the question, why is Mitch McConnell so popular in Kentucky?
He takes care of the state. Yeah. I mean, this is a state that still has, areas of economic distress, particularly in a rural community. He has tremendous control as the leader of the Senate, the majority leader, and he makes sure his state is taken care of. Unfortunately, the Senate, I mentioned the Electoral College before, the Senate is the second least democratic institution we have. And by that, I'll give you an example. Every state, no matter how large, gets 2 senators. So on the one hand, I have California, a state with 55 million people that have 2 United States senators. On the other hand, I can add up 14 red states, Republican, small states, that collectively have 55 million people, but each state has 2 United States senators. So I have one pool of 55 million people with 2 senators. I have another pool of 55 million people with 28 senators. It's 110 million people. That's a third of the United States. And you have a disparity and a ratio of 14-1 in terms of their representation in the United States Senate. I don't fault the founders for all of this. They couldn't envision completely, although they knew there were Western territories that they felt they owned, right, and would fight for and steal from Native Americans over the course of the history. but I don't think they envision 55, 300 million people. So I think we have to, at some point, come to grips with the failures of democratic institutions without faulting the founders. The theory of originalism that they use, and they tout Antonin Scalia. Well, if you want to look at originalism, let's look at the Second Amendment and what the word militia meant. Yeah. Right? It was a well-regulated militia. It was controlled by states. The government required people to buy their muskets and didn't pay for them because it was for the defense of the country. It wasn't for people to go to the local shopping mall with their muskets and shoot people up, which is what we're living with now in this country, or for people to be able to, be 14 years old and carry an assault weapon into their school and kill their classmates. That wasn't what that amendment is about.
Very well put, and those who aren't aware should be aware that Joel does a lot of work around messaging on the Second Amendment and how both Democrats and Republicans could legislate for gun reform. Some of his writing on that is well worth reading. Going back to the Senate Majority Leader, Joel, we've got a question as to whether you think that Mitch McConnell will carry out effectively what he did over the 8 years of the Obama presidency and be kind of pretty unrelenting. Do you think he will do the same with the President Biden, or can perhaps the personal relationship that they established together in the Senate have some kind of difference around the margins?
I have not seen anything in Mitch McConnell's behavior that suggests to me he will ever truly put the country ahead of his political interests, which are completely about maintaining a Senate majority. I think history will look very unkindly on Mitch McConnell's tenure. I think the scope and breadth of the challenges we face as a country, still as the leader of the free world, probably more so now that Joe Biden will be the next president compared to Donald Trump and what he's done to our alliances. I think that he will go down as somebody who possibly, depending on what happens on the heels of his tenure, as a person who took what was once known as the greatest deliberative body on earth, the United States Senate, and turned it into a cheap imitation of a local legislature.
Okay, well, that's a kind of clear point of view there for the questioner. We've got a question here from Lewis Forsyth, who makes the point, which was turnout was fantastic in this election, and that may have been driven because it's, as he puts it, an unprecedented time. But he asked the question: what lessons can be carried forward in fostering democratic responsibility amongst the electorate?
I think the turnout was high because people think the stakes are high.
Yeah. And
turnout is high when people think the stakes are high. When we ran President Obama's 2000, helped run it. I mean, I was part of that team in 2012, his re-election campaign. We still weren't out of the throes of the fiscal crisis. Mitt Romney was running saying he could have done a better job than Obama. He wanted to make it a referendum on Obama and the economy. And we created a very clear architecture, if you will, for the campaign. The strategy communications team did. My team led the work with the polling, et cetera. And what our strategic imperative was to make the election a forward-looking choice based on a contrast of economic vision and economic values. And we had 4 buckets that we had to check off and do. And one of them was raise the stakes. And by raising the stakes, our line was, this is a make or break moment for the middle class and those striving to get there. And we were going to make that what the election was about. That was forward looking, a make or break election.
Yeah.
Not backwards looking like, oh, Obama did a shitty job, right? And we defined it based on our values. That's an economy where everyone gets a fair shot and everyone gets a fair shake. Everyone plays by the same rules from Main Street to Wall Street, and hard work pays and responsibility is rewarded. And what we did is we created a contrast and we created a forward-looking vision of where we wanted to take the country. That's what you have to do to win elections. They are about the future, not the past, I said, and they're about their lives. So did I leave any part of that question unanswered, David?
No, you've done it perfectly, and I'm conscious that we're coming towards the end of the time, so I'm going to use chair's privilege before I hand back to Kezia. I mean, you've worked with some, remarkable individuals. You've worked with Andrew Cuomo's father. You've worked with Bill Clinton. You've worked with Obama. You also, while you worked with Obama, you worked with Biden as well. Worked with Hillary Clinton. For your money, who do you think is the most accomplished politician, and why?
First of all, and I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege first, right? Because we're almost near the end, but you go through that list and there are still days and where I say to myself, and hearing you read that list, like, how the hell did that happen to me? How did I end up having this amazing life and this amazing career that I didn't get into until the age of 43 or something, right? And I really, sometimes I quote, there's this great speech by Lou Gehrig, who, when I'm not dying, but Lou Gehrig, when he was really sick and he had to stop playing baseball, a great New York Yankee, said in his speech, boy, a lot of people think I got a bum rap. He said, but I'm standing here today, surrounded by my teammates, the fans, and I feel like I'm the luckiest man on earth. And I want to tell you that before I answer that question, I do feel like I'm the luckiest man on earth. I have found a career that I am passionate about. I've had multiple parts of my career I've been passionate about, that I love, that I have been satisfying. And that would be a piece of advice to all of you. Do what you love. Don't do what you think you need to do to make money. You have to make money. You have to earn a living. But you will ultimately do better, both personally, I believe, and financially, doing what you love doing. So that's a bit of perspective. You've gone through a list of people who are all extraordinary. And again, part of the luck I feel is that I have gotten to work with them. I have learned from all of them. But Barack Obama was a unique talent. He was a unique talent. He was an amazing person to work for and work with. It was a team that was built in that first election in particular, but sustained throughout. That, it was just a team effort. We didn't have the normal backbiting and BS that you get in a campaign. The great thing about it was the way Obama set a tone that everybody knew what I don't want to say what your lane was, but you did. Yeah. You knew what your primary lane and role were in the campaign. And you didn't have to fight for your territory because he led by example. And so did the campaign team of David Plouffe and David Axelrod, two great friends of mine. And you knew that if you were needed outside of your lane, you would be asked to join. Yeah. I didn't lobby to get on the debate prep team, but I was asked to be on the debate prep team. They wanted me there. So it was a culture that emanated from the top that said, this is a team effort. We have built the greatest team ever. Everybody was respected for what they brought to the table. And so you didn't have those little fights you have over territory. And he governed that way. And he was just, look, I really didn't spend a lot of time in the Oval Office. I spent a lot of time in the Roosevelt Room in the White House, because that's where we had meetings. When we had meetings. But, getting to sit up close to a person and watch him make decisions and think through decisions and want to hear from everybody in that room. Like he knew he had assembled a team of people for a reason, and he wanted to hear what you had to say. So, it was an experience that would be hard to replicate. And it's not just about winning. It was about the way that team worked. I mean, look, I am still friends with, the guys at Crooked Media, at the time we did the first campaign, I used to call them my Obama kids, because I'd go to Chicago and we'd go out to dinner together and I'd pick up the tab because these guys were all in their 20s, they're now all media superstars, and they've done a phenomenal job at doing what they're doing, but it was just an experience of a lifetime. So, and the re-elect, being part of a team, as I said, Obama was only the 7th president elected and re-elected with 50% or more of the vote. And I think, on a personal note, I feel the best work I ever did was in 2012, because a lot of the odds were against us, even though he was an incumbent, based on where the economy was. And I think I really helped develop a framework for how we had to fight the campaign, working in tandem with David Axelrod, and the team was still there largely. But I do think it was the best work I ever did. And, and I had the freedom to do that. They trusted in me, and, I tried to live up to that trust every day.
Well, Joel, that's a great way to kind of end this session. I can't thank you enough for the time. You've got lots of demands on your time, but I know how much you like the university and the time that you've given to it in the past. And hopefully the next time we do this, we'll be able to do it kind of face-to-face with the students. But with that, I just want to thank you again for your time, and I'll hand back to Kez to close us out.
Joel, thank you so much. What a privilege it's been to spend an hour in your company and to hear both you and David have a deep dive conversation about what the world has witnessed over the past few days, especially to see it set in the context of the previous contests, which you've got such knowledge and understanding of as well. And for me, what was so nice to hear was for you to start talking about the humility of Biden and the importance of that going forward in terms of how he might lead, but also to hear you reflect on some of the employability aspects of your own career, why creative thinking and writing skills are just as critical as your ability to analyse lots of statistical detail. I think that's really great for our students to hear, not least when you rounded off with the importance of being nice, which I think is something that us at the John Smith Centre, we really appreciate. In the midst of the conversation we had tonight, David joked that everybody in the United Kingdom is now an expert in US counties. I've just checked, and for the viewers who are watching this, they are still counting in Maricopa County, which we're also familiar with. And, we've got people like Jake Tanner, John King, and Anderson Cooper, all household names in the UK now after this last week. But I think the one person who struck a chord more than others would have been Van Jones, who went viral in the UK with his particular comments just after CNN announced the result, talking about the importance of decency, why it matters, why integrity matters, and why character matters. And I think you've given us a great 90 minutes there on the kind of context that sits in. So thank you to both David and Joe for your contributions tonight. The David Muir Lecture Series is back next Thursday at 4 p.m, 11 a.m. if you're joining us from the US, where we're going to be joined by Teddy Goff, who is going to talk to us a little bit more about some of the new campaigning techniques and the role of technology in the election gone past. So if you'd like to join us for that, you can register for that event today on the John Smith Centre website. And all is left for me to say is thank you and good night. Bye for now.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Joel.
Bye-bye. Cheers.